Okay, so now we are ready to start this webinar called Measuring Nonverbal Coordination as a Significant Therapist Skill in Child Psychotherapy through Psychotherapist Nonverbal Coordination Coding System by Catay and Sibel Halfon. So go
Thank
ahead when
you.
you want.
Thank you, Claudia, for having us, and thank you, everyone, for making the time. Let me share my PowerPoint right now. Okay, it works, right? Good. A moment of nonverbal coordination. Um, Thank you, everyone. It's exciting to be sharing this research with you that involved many years and number of different phases. And for me personally, it really brings together my training and areas of interest in different areas, and also kind of my professional journey in different places in Istanbul, New York, kind of helps me weave again the connections. So the nonverbal layer in therapy, and especially child therapy, is actually an essential part of the process, and we often perceive and respond to that layer, but we rarely talk about it, especially in the domain of kind of most of the child therapy modalities. And kind of strikes me because we often lack the vocabulary to articulate this layer, or tools to really make sense of it or integrate it into our interventions. So this work really comes from that need to address that need. And in fact, I mean, owing to my background in dance therapy as well, I know that the nonverbal layer is actually quite easily accessible if we kind of attend to it, and if we have the helpful tools to tune into it. So maybe we thought we could start with a little exercise in that, and we will share an image. Okay, there it is. Everyone sees that, right? Okay. So this is an image I found online on the web, and I believe it shows a child and a therapist in interaction with quite distinct physical bodily postures. And we would like us all to take a moment to look at it and to perceive it. And in doing that, try to also see how your body resonates in response to these postures. And we will invite everyone to kind of maybe first look at this child and the body position this child is holding, and try to name for yourself. And if you feel so inclined to actually maybe to put it in the chat, what you see in this child's body. But really we try to stay with the bodily level, try to define what movements you see this child doing, what body parts seem to be active, what kind of quality you perceive, what is the resonance, the sensation in your body. And then we will invite you to do the same for this adult, this therapist. I'm not sure if people want to share some words, take a moment to share some words in the chat. But also, I'm not really able to... okay.
I can track the chat.
Thank you, that's helpful. All right.
Engaged.
Engaged. Okay.
Active. Strengthen his arms, a smile. Joy. Yeah, joy. Open, approaching, balancing. Opening up. He's lifting himself up. Hands, torso are engaged. We again have engaged, active, understood.
Okay.
Agency, omnipotence.
Whoa.
Excitement.
Right.
Power. Seen.
Perfect.
Mm,
Thank you.
very strong and tuned words. They seem to be playing a peekaboo, maybe.
Okay.
Can and do are two words that came up, which are very relevant.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Quite powerful words. And then once we tap into this layer, they just keep flowing, right?
Mhm.
So there are so many different words now in the chat. And if we take a moment, we could actually see some of them relate to really the body and the movement, right? Like pushing, lifting. Some of them seem to relate to feelings, maybe joy.
Excited.
Sorry?
Excitement.
Excitement, right, exactly. And then some of them maybe relate to the relationship layer, like seen. And some of them maybe relate to kind of more general, deeper mental states like can do, power, I have the power, maybe.
Mhm.
So we go between different layers, right? And some of our research was really about trying to distinguish those different layers and to build the bridges between them. But it sounds like many people point to the quality of active, engaged. And one challenge in looking at this through our lens would be to really identify where do you see the active, where do you see the engaged, what gives us that feeling. And I believe most people would say that there is such strength, right, in the way this child pushes the pillow and lifts himself up in an erect position. And there seems to be really a lot of active engagement through the gaze and the facial expression. Now, in response to this child kind of pushing himself up in the vertical with a lot of strength, what we see in the therapist, this adult, is kind of a complementary, almost an opposite position of really lowering herself down and kind of widening what we call in the horizontal plane. So if you look at the positions, they're actually in contrast to each other, but we see really a lot of complementarity and a lot of engagement through this nonverbal language. So if we kind of project onto this, like we don't really know what's happening for the internal world of this child or this therapist, but we kind of looking at the postures, if we project into us, we probably think this child is really enjoying being so tall and strong, right? Which kind of also fits with his developmental level and his age. And he has maybe just mastered climbing on top of this. And this therapist, through assuming this complementary position, is almost underlining that. Kind of lowering herself down, which is kind of a reversal of the usual power dynamics, right, between the adult and the child. This reversal in this very playful way, and she's almost communicating to him, I see you being so strong and tall, and I join in your delight in this, and we can play with this power differential, and we can delight in your accomplishment in the moment. I don't know if you would like to add anything to this interpretation, but this is kind of a method we've used a lot in looking at detailed child videotapes, where we went through these different layers of what we see happening in real time in the bodies of the child and the therapist in response to that, and how we make linkages with that and maybe the verbal contact and whatever is happening in the therapeutic context in the moment. So we will come back to all of this with some video examples, but hopefully this is an introduction, and our research involves a big collaboration between Sibel Halfon's Child Psychotherapy Process Research Lab at Istanbul Bilgi University, the Center for Attachment Research at the New School led by Dr. Miriam Still, and Dr. George Downing, who joined us mostly from Paris. And our study was supported by a grant from the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey and also from International Psychological Association. And as Claudia noted, it was published as psychotherapy research. You could check it out for more details. And today I will try to quickly review some of the relevant concepts that informed this coding system, present the coding system to you, and Sibel will present the findings from our validity study and the further research directions we aim to pursue, and then we will talk about its clinical applications. Now, an increasing body of research, both from neuropsychology and developmental psychology, really underline how emotions and interactions are embodied. We've registered them through somatic sensations. And in fact, interactional synchrony, in terms of how we synchronize our movements, has long been studied in daily social interactions. And it has been linked with a sense of bonding, affiliation, and trust in just daily relationships. And it seems to facilitate empathy, cooperation, and perspective taking among people. We tend to like people who we move in synchrony with. That's a simple effect that's actually has been used in many religious and community building practices for centuries. Now, in the domain of caregiver-infant interaction, there is again a growing body of research that finds that nonverbal synchrony, kind of synchrony in movement patterns, face-to-face interactions, vocalization qualities, touch, form the building block of self-regulation and empathy capacities. It has been linked with attachment security and cognitive capacities, social competence, and in later years also with child's symbolic play and representational ability. Now, as Beebe and Lachman note, the contingent responses into each other's simple movements and vocalizations provide the behavioral basis to understand each other's feeling states and intentions. It's almost one of the first ways we tune into each other, enter into each other's feeling states. Now, this attunement actually happens through the dynamic qualities of each other's actions. So it doesn't necessarily happen through exactly matching, the parent exactly matching the child's movement, but more so reflecting its dynamic qualities in his or her own body. And these qualities have been named as the intensity, shape, temporal patterning. So if the baby is kind of opening and closing its arms, the dynamic qualities of this action can be reflected in the parent's vocal qualities or the way they expand their facial features following a similar temporal patterning. So this is named as a cross-modal matching rather than exact mirroring, and since infants are able to detect cross-modal contingencies, it does contribute to their sense of being seen as an independent subjectivity and being reciprocated And furthermore, because this happens in the cross-modal realm, it kind of supports the baby's affective expressions regulation in a modified state. So there's a modification that becomes possible. And as a result of this dyadic dance, the infant is able to experience a wider range of affective states without becoming dysregulated necessarily. Now, even though this matching is important, research has shown that exact matching is not necessarily the ideal state, and for human interactions, really the mid-range coordination seems to be the norm, because what seems to be more important is to be able to flexibly move between states of matching and mismatching. And in fact, as Tronick's research underlines, the experience of the disruption and then being able to repair this contingent dialogue is really important, constituted. Now, again, kind of another line of research and conceptualization offered by Dr. Fonagy and his colleagues is this concept of marked mirroring. And again, this concept is based more on the difference and sameness, the right degree of difference and sameness. And in marked mirroring, the parent often represents the child's affective expression with slight differences, such as softening and exaggerating its intensity or responding in a different modality. Now, the adult psychotherapy research has utilized more automated systems to look at movement synchrony in sessions, and early research has drawn correlations between movement synchrony and kind of happening along different domains such as vocalization, matching of body movement, body position, postural mirroring, or affective expression. And early research found that these variables to be linked with therapeutic alliance, rapport, empathy, affect regulation, and therapy outcome. However, as the research in this domain kind of became more varied with variety of methods, samples, the findings are not as consistent. And recent reviews have underlined that what seems to be more important is the relationship between movement coordination in the session and affect regulation, rather than more distal outcome measures. And some researchers also highlight the need to study appropriate responsiveness, which integrates the right amount of synchronization together with regulation based on the context, the process in psychotherapy. So our coding system really adapts the concept of responsive coordination rather than synchrony, and we try to assess this coordination across multiple domains of nonverbal interaction. So rather than trying to come up with an instrument of very fine-tuned assessment along a single domain, we try to capture responsiveness that could happen along various domains. And we try to come up with a system that's more clinically relevant and practical, which can be taught to coders with basic training in child psychotherapy. And the other goal was to come up with a more clinically useful tool that offered a method and vocabulary for clinicians. The core concepts we used in the system was, again, the idea of coordination, which I will say more about in a minute. The fact that it's multimodal. So what we look at location, how the bodies are placed in the room and how that location changes in response to each other. The body shape, the different shapes the body takes. Movement dynamics that are assessed along elements of time, weight, orientation to space, vocalization, and facial expression. In developing this system, we adapted elements from Laban movement analysis system, which is a movement analysis system that is used widely in the domain of dance movement therapy. And we really took its basic elements and features and tried to adapt it in child psychotherapy context, which I will say more about again. And the idea is that to adapt this system into a more dyadic and contextual focus in the context of child psychotherapy. In developing our coding system, there was an extensive exploratory phase of viewing child psychotherapy videos. These happened in joint lab meetings with participation of other clinicians, students, researchers, and some of whom I see today, which is very nice. Maybe they could also talk about their experiences. So we used child therapy videotapes from Sibel Halfon's lab, and we looked at them minute by minute. And in a way, kind of in a similar way we did with the photo initially, we try to come up with a method where we look at movement, and then we look at what transpires in the interaction, and what that might mean in this particular moment, in this particular context. The goal was to arrive at a consolidation of vocabulary that's useful to describe nonverbal behavior. Again, we used Laban movement analysis system as a baseline, and we really try to identify the most relevant concepts and vocabulary in this context from that system. And we also ended up identifying some additional descriptors that emerged as a result of these meetings. And we tried to build the bridges between the nonverbal layer and important basic therapeutic functions such as containment, presence, attunement, regulation, playfulness, what exactly in the body expresses these elements. So this is another description of this process. Now, as a result, the idea of coordination, the definition of coordination we arrived at really included different elements. So in any given minute, the therapist could be evidencing what for us counted as good enough coordination through one, matching the child's movement quality, in terms of the form or dynamic elements such as timing or the use of strength. The therapist could also be moderating it, somehow matching it, but maybe upregulating it through increasing the rhythm, or they could be maybe down-regulating it through smoothing out. There could be elements of synchronizing along the temporal elements, moving at the same time in the same way. Or there could be complementing, meaning adapting a very different and maybe even contrasting element, which still seemed to support this child's expression. Again, in a similar way we saw in the image. Here is the final categories we arrived at. So I'll just very quickly kind of review them. But in any given minute, we look at all of these categories. We look at the location. So where does the child place herself or himself in the room, and how does the therapist then locate themselves in relation to the child? And these are some of the elements we look at to describe coordination in this category. So we look at the distance from the child. Are they very close? Are they quite far away? And again, there's no one correct way to do this. Everything is very contextual and dyadic. So we look at what is it that they're doing? Are they playing with a ball? Is the child telling the therapist about a significant event that happened to them, which makes them feel a bit maybe vulnerable in the moment? So how does the distance between them support this expression at this given point? We look at level. Are they sitting down? Are they standing up? Are they on the ground? We look at their placement. Are they face to face, side by side? And again, each of these positions may make certain possibilities happen, and they may hinder others. This is all very contextual. We look at the body shape. Again, this is taken really directly from Laban, but we use it in a very simplified format. We look at if their body is open, closed, are they leaning forward, leaning back, are they kind of long or short. Then we look at movement dynamics, meaning time. Are they moving quickly? Are they moving in a sustained, slow way? One thing we found is that moments of stillness and waiting in the therapeutic context seem to be quite significant. So if there is that, we tend to make note of that. And does the stillness seem to be present and attentive, or is there a frozenness to it maybe? We look at the use of force, weight. Is there strong movements, light movements, their orientation to space, how they use their gaze. Then we look at facial coordination. Is the therapist's facial expression generally aligned with that of the child? Do they make use of opportunities for eye contact? And then we look at the vocalization quality. Is the therapist able to use their vocal qualities with an appropriate range in volume, pitch? And again, here, moments of quietness, silence is significant, as well as the rate of speech. So each category is coded, but then we arrive at the total coordination score, which is what we used in analysis. The final coding happens for 1 minute long segments. Each category is rated on a 3-point scale. Very simply, 2-point meaning good enough coordination, 3-point meaning good coordination, and 1-point meaning unsatisfactory coordination. And higher score means there's responsive, attuned coordination with the child's expression. The therapist is able to use their nonverbal language in a flexible way with appropriate range, and the way they are doing this is aligned with broad therapeutic goals, which we define as, in any given minute, promoting the child's engagement in the process, regulating affect and attention, and supporting the child's expression either through symbolic play, affective display, or verbalization. 7 coders received a training of 50 hours plus, and some of the coders are here with us today, which is very nice to see them. The training included reviewing coding criteria, engaging in embodied exercises to really find those qualities in one's bodies, viewing videos, coding as a group, and then each coder completing independent video coding assignments. The coders demonstrated inter-rater reliability through an assignment of 12 video segments and achieving a minimum ICC of 0.70 with me, basically. And the final ICC scores range from 0.81 to 0.90, so they really achieved very good inter-rater reliability. And here is our coding and research assistants. Many special thanks to them. I think I will stop here and let Sibel present the results of the study, and then I'll be back with to discuss some clinical examples.
Okay, great. So I'll share my slides. Okay. So, okay. Hello again. So I will basically be talking about the studies we conducted to assess the validity of the PNC nonverbal coordination measure. And these studies were conducted in mentalization-based treatment for children. That's where the data came from. So I will very briefly talk about a few interventions in MBT-C to help set the context of where the data came from. So this is MBT-C ladder of interventions. You see different kinds of interventions here. And the first ladder is attention control interventions. And they are going to sound similar to some of the concepts that Zeynep has described. So mirroring and attuning to the child's bodily experiences and signals, regulating the child's arousal and engagement through posture, gesture, or movement, using facial and vocal coordination to help the child feel mirrored and seen, and also using various kinds of sensory and movement-based play. So this intervention heavily draws on the nonverbal characteristics, and it's also the foundation and the basic building block of mentalization. We use this kind of intervention especially with more dysregulated children who start therapy in a more dysregulated state, who don't yet feel safe in their bodies, and with children who may initially have difficulty forming an alliance and engagement, a relationship with the therapist. And all these interventions help the child feel safer in their body, more regulated, and then we can gradually introduce the more higher order interventions upon this intervention, such as emotion regulation and explicit mentalizing. I won't go into those. So our validity questions were that in the MBT-C study, we thought that therapist nonverbal coordination in the sessions would be positively associated with attention control interventions since they both share nonverbal qualities. We also expected a higher therapist nonverbal coordination measured by the PNC to predict higher therapeutic alliance, meaning children would feel a stronger emotional bond in the context of their therapist's higher nonverbal coordination. And Zeynep also talked about the relationship between nonverbal coordination and play. It's such a key element of the capacity to play. So we thought that the better the therapists coordinated their bodies with the child, the more the child could engage in play, could feel regulated in play, and could engage in more adaptive coping strategies in play. So these were the validity questions. This is where the data came from. It was collected in the context of a randomized control trial that was published, and you can see the full reference for the publication if you're interested in the study design. But we basically had 222 school-age children in the study that were either randomized to MBT-C or a control condition, and we assessed these children longitudinally to assess outcomes throughout the treatment. For the context of the PNC study, all the sessions were videotaped. So we had the chance to really observe the nonverbal characteristics of the therapist and in-session affect regulation of the child, and to make more detailed assessments of these session level qualities. Our sample, very briefly, the child age in the study was about 8. Children's ages ranged between 5 and 12. We had for 39% of the children were female. Their problem types were ranged between internalizing 41% and then 20% were externalizing. And 39% had mixed internalizing and externalizing problems. And a lot of these children were, as expected, insecurely attached, about 80%. So really needing that, building that relational core. In terms of the therapists and the supervision model of the study, we had 16 therapists, and they were mostly newly beginning therapists. And they all received standard MBT-C training and supervision throughout treatments. For PNC session sampling, we basically, for the study that, for the validity study, our inclusion criteria were that children received MBT-C and they had at least one videotape psychotherapy session. So overall, we had 101 children in MBT-C. And we had 269 videotapes that were analyzed of these children, and these sessions came from different phases of treatment, early, middle, and end phases. And for the coding procedure, from each session, we were able to code 6 minutes. And each minute was coded for a total of 1,641 minutes in the study. And each minute was coded by 2 trained coders, and they had excellent inter-rater reliabilities using the PNC, about 0.95. And Zeynep held bi-weekly coder meetings with the raters to prevent coder drift. So our findings. First, I want to show you some descriptives. So these are the descriptives of nonverbal coordination measured by PNC in early sessions, mid sessions, and late sessions. And you'll see that it's about 2, both in early phases, mid phases, and late phases. So therapists had stable nonverbal coordination, and a 2 means good enough coordination. 1 is unsatisfactory, and 3 is really good. So they maintained good enough, which is what we would expect. But here I want you to see the range. There is high range, ranging from 1 to 2.86. This tells us that therapists had different skill levels in terms of their nonverbal coordination, and perhaps some children needed more nonverbal coordination and some needed less. So there was a lot of therapist variability. And you'll see some of the variability in the videotapes that we'll show you later on. So initial findings, all the data analysis were 3-level, multi-level models, sessions nested within children within therapists. So remember, the first hypothesis was, are attention control interventions of MBT-C, which rely heavily on nonverbal characteristics, are they related to nonverbal coordination measured by PNC? And yes, indeed, we found a significant association between the two, supporting the convergent validity of the scale. And then we also looked at whether nonverbal coordination measured by PNC predicted children's therapeutic alliance, the therapeutic alliance that was reported by the children at the end of the sessions. And higher nonverbal coordination predicted better therapeutic alliance, meaning they felt a stronger emotional bond when therapists coordinated better with them. And they were able to feel more regulated in the sessions. It also predicted children's play regulation, so they could play in a more regulated way, show more adaptive coping strategies in play, show a wider range of emotion in a more contained and modulated fashion. So these all supported our initial validity analysis. Then we went to assessing, does nonverbal coordination predict outcome? And here I put an iceberg here deliberately. So I'm adapting the metaphor of an iceberg because we saw multiple layers in our analyses. And Zeynep also presented some of the findings from adult psychotherapy, and you see they're mixed and complex. We don't always find a direct association with treatment outcomes, or if there is a direct association, it's a weak association in adult psychotherapy. To my knowledge, this was not assessed in the context of child psychotherapy. So we assessed multiple things. We first wanted to see, does higher nonverbal coordination predict overall lower levels of child problems across treatment, which is what we would expect? Does it predict differences in individual trajectories, meaning when therapists coordinate better with children, do we see a faster rate of change in their problems? And a deeper layer, are there other variables if there is a relationship between nonverbal coordination and outcome, are there other variables that explain the link, such as perhaps regulation? We have been talking about regulation a lot. So could it be that nonverbal coordination improves children's regulation and through that link improves outcomes? So our first set of findings, where we first looked at rates of change in child problems over the course of MBT-C. This is all over the course of MBT-C. And we first conducted multi-level moderation analyses. And our first finding was a little counterintuitive, and we were surprised. We found that the main effect of nonverbal coordination, meaning increased nonverbal coordination, was associated with an increase in average problem levels over the course of treatment, which is interesting. And we didn't understand that at first, but the moderation analysis helped us understand it better, and there's probably a lot more to unpack there. We found a significant interaction between nonverbal coordination and time, which showed that when nonverbal coordination levels were high, children indeed demonstrated faster improvements in problems. And perhaps I can show that better in a slide. So this, in a figure, I mean, this figure shows the change in children's total problems measured by the CBCL, going from baseline to post-treatment. And this blue line, you can see it's going down from baseline to post-treatment, represents the rate of change when baseline coordination, when nonverbal coordination is low. So there is a change, but let's look at the change when nonverbal coordination is high. And you see that the rate of change is a lot faster here. When nonverbal coordination is high, children change a lot faster compared to the low condition. Now I want to show you something different. If we look at the figure again, it's telling us something else. Children in the low coordination group, their baseline is about 60. And here's children in the high coordination group. What do you see? Their baseline problems is about 70, which is quite a difference. So these children who received higher coordination also had higher baseline problems. And this is intuitively done by the therapists. This is what the data shows us. These children were not grouped explicitly. Therapists intuitively used higher nonverbal coordination with children who had higher baseline problem levels. This is so significant because, clinically, we would expect these children to be more dysregulated, to perhaps be more challenging, perhaps, to engage, to have more difficulties in engagements, more difficulties in alliance. So possibly therapists were using more nonverbal coordination with these children to engage them and to help them feel more regulated. And a significant positive main effect between nonverbal coordination, increase in nonverbal coordination and increase in higher problem levels is mostly driven by this baseline difference, which is very meaningful. So after all this, all these findings about regulation, we wanted to see, does nonverbal coordination relate to treatment outcomes through children's affect regulation? Is there an indirect effect? And I can show you what I mean. So nonverbal coordination, initially predicting children's more regulation in play, which predicts lower child problems. So the more the therapists coordinate, the more regulation children feel, and the fewer problems we see. Could this be an explanation? And indeed, we found that. So in the first path, what we found was the higher the nonverbal coordination, the better child regulation. And then, the better child regulation, significantly fewer child problems. Both of these paths were significant. And the indirect effect, A times B, so nonverbal coordination to regulation in play to child problems was significant, meaning nonverbal coordination primarily related to outcome through affect regulation in play. And the direct effect was not significant. So this really gives us a change mechanism that nonverbal coordination could help children feel more regulated and through that path impact broader treatment outcomes. So we have a lot of from these directions for future research, and we would be interested to hear your ideas as well. Thus, is therapeutic alliance a mediator? Could there be another mediator here? We've been talking about therapeutic alliance a lot. Could there be differential effects of nonverbal coordination by symptom or problem type? Children who can get more dysregulated, such as children with externalizing problems, could they have different outcomes in the context of nonverbal coordination? And we can also look at these through process-oriented case studies. We have not looked at associations with other MBT interventions. So how does nonverbal coordination relate to more explicit mentalizing verbal interventions? Could it be that they provide the embodied foundation for practicing more verbal interventions? And it's also, these were done in the context of MBT-C, but we would be interested to see if there are similar patterns of effects of nonverbal coordination in other child psychotherapy models. I'm going to stop here.
Okay, thank you, Sibel. That was a lot to cover. Next, we would like to, show you actually some video segments. And for this section, Claudia, I think we need to pause recording. That's okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if someone wants to make a question out loud or in the chat, we have about 15 minutes.
I don't know if you hear me.
Yes.
Yes, Maria Eugenia.
Oh, okay. I am in my phone, which is not very ideal to see the videos, but the first videos looked to me that the part I saw that therapist was doing a little bit invasive in the space of the child. And that was my first impression, trying to help to match the children, which is a very different. That's why I interpreted that child was exploring this environment, which is probably new or relatively new, playing with the lamp things and doing some play. And I thought it was little room to connect to the therapist. That was my naturalistic observation, which is absolutely different to the second video, in which is a different age, is a different relationship with the therapist. And well, that's just a comment. The other thing is, how do you interpret or how do you explain this embodiment approach from the part of the therapist, which is not only following the movements of the patient or the child in this case, but is just feeling in the body what's going on. Do you consider this, that you don't need to be moving around to have an embodied perception? It's just a different thing. So if you could explain more about what is your embodiment explanation there, or how do you interpret embodiment, because maybe we have different significations for that. That's it.
That's a very good point, and maybe deserves a whole other seminar. But I would say we absolutely don't need to be moving, although we move all the time. You know, that in my stillness, there's movement, and there's a lot of dynamics actually, because I can be kind of frozen or rigid, or I can be kind of still, but I could still express a lot of vitality. So we move all the time, but it doesn't have to be overt big movements to convey embodiment. So I think the concept of embodiment should really integrate all layers, which starts with resonance in the body. I think the more resonance, which means really connection to our internal sensations that are evoked as we are viewing movement, witnessing movement, which then could connect with active movement, expressive movement. So I think we need to flexibly go between all these layers, ideally.
I think so. I think I agree very much about the many layers, because also it's the layer of micro movements, almost imperceptible movements in adult patients. For example, when you are face to face and you're not moving in the room, you have to be able to pick up these small, very little things.
Right, and then there's the layers of breath, arousal level, muscle tension, which are actually also researched in adult therapy, which is not necessarily our focus, but there's a lot of synchronization, coordination that happens all through those layers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Marcia has a question as well, and she commented on the chat.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's not so much a question, but a recognition of the word intentional. Giving the body its due in psychotherapeutic training is, we know it's far behind. And yet what you've done today is make it accessible, because I feel that there's fear about bringing the body into a recognized training. It's getting less now. It's getting less. But I believe it's a necessary, when we talk about layers, has been mentioned, a necessary layer of training, especially when you're working with children. Your own body is in relationship to that child. And if you're trained that your movement is going to be a positive aspect, you have to watch it, because it could be too much movement, of course, but that the field between the child and the therapist is a field which the therapist can move into with her body and create a dynamic with the child rather than only verbal. So I say it's necessary as practice for a therapist.
Okay, so now we have free hands. So maybe if it's okay with you, we take all the free and
Yes.
then you make a
I'm
comment.
sorry, Claudia, and just to say, I mean, thank you, Marsha, for verbalizing all of those. And if I may just add, there's also this conception that the movement or the nonverbal and the verbal take away from each other. It's almost like there's a competition, that it's as if you're connected through the nonverbal, you're less connected in terms of the verbal symbolic, and that has been, I think, a bias that's very much in the field, that I think is being corrected now, but just the idea that the two actually feed into each other rather than taking away from each other, just to add that piece. But thank you. So maybe Lucia has a comment.
Okay. Thank you for sharing your research. It was a beautiful to listen to. So thank you very much. And I was wondering about the use of body in the context of therapy with children who have suffered abuse, physical or sexual abuse, because that's our study interest. Because we always discuss how it's very difficult to stay there, but to put limits too. For example, if a child wants to touch therapist very much or wants to put something in their mouth or whatever, it's complicated for the therapist. It's very challenging because you want to be all in for that child, but there's some limits that you have to establish too. So I was wondering in about your thoughts in this area about the use of limits in haste and at the same time the use of the body of the therapist. What's the balance in that terms?
Felix?
Thank you so much for the talk and the videos. It was very inspiring. I wanted to second Marcia also. I think it's very important that we integrate the body more. And my question is from where you are now, what are your next plans or directions where you want to go? Do you consider, as you mentioned in the papers of Ramsay and Chachar, for example, to integrate some technical measurement of bodily movement, or are there maybe specific reasons you don't plan on doing that? I would be interested in that. So your future directions with the specifics to technicalities and why or why not implement them. So thanks again.
Ursula.
Echoing everyone's thanks, and don't want to take up too much time with more thanks, but I was curious about the variable that I forget, mediated or moderated the relationship and outcome, the affect regulation and play variable. And if you had any examples from those last two tapes of that variable happening, just wanted to understand more what that looks like in practice.
Sibel, maybe would you like to start with that last?
Start with that question. Okay, so I think the second child is a good example of that. I mean, the child, we would have to see a longer segment to be able to code the regulation. We usually code it from a longer segment. It's coded on the longest play segment of the session. But the child started more rigid and more timid and was also expressing that rigidity at first, like more small, more inhibited movements, more disruptions in play. And then, as the therapist coordinated with the child, we saw the child really widen, really start to move more rhythmically with the therapist. It started to show more excitement and joy. And there was one moment when the child got a bit dysregulated, was moving in really big movements, ha, ha. And then the therapist slowed down a bit. And the child could too. So this is what the variable refers to, showing a wide range of emotions. With different intensities. These could be different emotions. In this child case, this was a mix of joy, pleasure, and aggression, but in a way that's modulated in the child's control, can move through different cadences and intensities with intention and with the child's control. So the second video is a good example of that. And we see that flow with the therapist as the therapist is, slows down and backs up and, starts to move in more gradual terms. The child can also start to be more intentional about their movements. I hope that's more clear. But you're so right. We usually code it from longer segments, and we showed you very short segments in a very short amount of time.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can say maybe just very briefly about Lucia's question about how do we work with abuse in cases of abuse. I mean, that's very important, and I think it's even more needed, this kind of awareness and skill. We really think of this as a psychotherapist skill that needs to be further developed in cases of, child therapy training. It's even more needed, more sensitivity, more flexibility. But, with the cases of abuse, really the whole idea of body boundaries and safety and space that needs to be kind of reintegrated, which has been disrupted. And that's all part of the verbal, nonverbal language. It's not just about us getting closer or being in direct interaction. Sometimes what you want to work on is a safer distance, what feels right, and to be able to connect to the feedback that comes from one's body, because you also become disconnected from that, right? When you suffer from an abuse, you can't listen, you can't trust what feels right, what feels too much, and you don't know how to make that evident. So definitely, but in a more kind of careful way. And maybe, Sibel, do you want to say more about future directions? Or do you have more to add to this question?
Maybe I could add more, but for the purposes of time, maybe I move on to the next question. In terms of future directions, so I think when you said more, technical looking at the body, were you talking about integrating a more structured synchrony measure, like it's been used in adult psychotherapy? Was that what you were referring to?
Yeah, for example, but also like other measures you could fathom, for example, like heart rate variability or stuff like that, just like general sensor technology.
I see. So I think they could be integrated and we could see how they interact with this measure, but the conceptualization of PNC and the way we see nonverbal coordination is a bit more distinct than it's been theorized in adult psychotherapy. So this is not just, synchronizing different modes. It could be heart rate variability or any other mode of body, but it's more about contingency and modulating, and it also includes therapist responsivity within the measure itself. So that was why we did not integrate those measures, or that's why we presented it as being a bit more distinct than those measures, moving beyond synchrony towards coordination, modulating, contingency, attunement, those kinds of concepts. That's where the theoretical background and the measure development comes from. But maybe Zeynep, you might want to add something to that.
No, I mean, that's basically, it's so complex trying to measure child psychotherapy because, they're active bodies moving in space, which is what it's supposed to be. So we just work with 2 video cameras in opposite corners of the room. Maybe as next research, we are working, actually, Niyazi Camcıoğlu, I think he's here from Bilgi University. We are now working with them to look at verbalization, actually, therapist verbalization, and how much of a more embodied language is there, and how that interacts with different variables. So maybe that's another layer we would like to study more, how to go between the play between the nonverbal and the verbal layer.
Okay, so we will stop now. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and especially Zeynep and Sibel for an excellent presentation. As I tell at the beginning, afterwards, the recording will be able at the SPR webpage in the CAFT section. So if someone wants to go back, there will be. I don't know if Zeynep or Sibel want to say any final word or comment.
Well, thank you very much for having us. It's very exciting to see so much interest on this aspect, and there's so much more to do and collaborate on. So if anybody would like to be in touch, we would be happy to hear from you.
Yes, thank you so much. This was wonderful to present and to hear everyone's thoughts and to think together through the nonverbal mediums. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you both, and hope to see you all at another webinar.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.